Anna had always enjoyed the peace of her apartment, a cozy sanctuary where she could lose herself in the world of books. That evening was no different. With a cup of chamomile tea by her side, she was engrossed in a novel, its captivating tale of mystery enveloping her in its pages. The warm, dim light from her table lamp cast a gentle glow, creating the perfect reading ambiance. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A peculiar glimmer, like a fracture in reality, appeared in the middle of her living room. Anna blinked in confusion, thinking it might just be her tired eyes playing tricks on her. But as the glimmer intensified, her surroundings became bathed in an iridescent light. Gently placing her book down, Anna squinted to make out the source of the disturbance. From this shimmering portal emerged a small pink figure that stood in stark contrast to her modern minimalist apartment. This was no ordinary creature. It was distinctly humanoid but stood no taller than a large doll. Its skin, a soft pastel pink, seemed to absorb and reflect the ambient light. What caught Anna's attention the most were its three curious antennae. Each emanated a soft, pulsating glow and seemed to dance and wriggle, as if attuned to some hidden frequency. The creature's large, round eyes blinked curiously, surveying its surroundings and finally settling on Anna. She was a mix of fear, fascination, and disbelief. How had this being entered her home? And more importantly, what did it want? Anna's heart raced as she tried to process the sight before her. The room, which seconds ago had been a haven of tranquility, now felt charged with an unsettling energy emanating from the creature. The air grew colder, and the dim light from her table lamp cast eerie shadows that seemed to dance menacingly around the room. The creature's large round eyes locked onto Anna's with an unsettling intensity. It was as if it were trying to communicate, to bridge an insurmountable gap between two vastly different worlds. Then, without warning, it opened its mouth, revealing a deep void from which emerged the most chilling sound Anna had ever heard. The high-pitched shriek pierced the silence of the room. It was a sound so sharp, so inhuman, that it felt like nails on a chalkboard, magnified 1,000 times. The sheer force of the noise bore into Anna's mind, the sensation similar to a vice tightening around her head. The pressure was immediate and crushing, making her feel as if her very sanity were being squeezed out. Desperation and terror took hold. The instinct to survive, to protect oneself from an immediate threat, is deeply ingrained, and Anna was no exception. Without a conscious thought, her leg shot out, her foot connecting solidly with the creature's soft body. The impact sent it hurtling across the room, its shriek momentarily interrupted by a surprised gasp. Anna's ears rang in the aftermath, the echoes of the creature's cry still reverberating in her mind. She tried to catch her breath, each second feeling like an eternity as she anticipated the creature's next move. With her heart pounding loudly in her ears, Anna didn't waste a moment. She yanked open her apartment door with such force that it slammed against the adjacent wall. The echo of the crash briefly filled the hallway as she darted out, leaving behind the sanctuary she once loved. Her breath came in sharp gasps, each one clouding in front of her as she descended the staircase 2 steps at a time. Emerging into the night, the once familiar streets of her neighborhood took on a more menacing aura. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, and the usual nocturnal sounds were drowned out by her own frenzied heartbeat. The cold air wrapped around her like a cloak, biting at her skin and turning her breath into visible plumes. But it was a small comfort, its chill momentarily numbing the burning sensation that lingered from the creature's shriek. Yet even with the temporary relief, an inescapable dread gnawed at her gut. The unsettling feeling of eyes watching, tracking her every move, was unshakable. Instinctively she picked up her pace, her heels echoing on the cobblestone streets, mingling with distant murmurs of nightlife. Risking a glance over her shoulder, her worst fears materialized. There it was, floating a few feet off the ground, the alien. Its form seemed to blur and shift with the speed of its pursuit, but those 3 antennae stood out unmistakably. Now, they glowed even more intensely, shimmering like stars against the dark backdrop of the night. Their brightness seemed to pulse in rhythm with Anna's own heartbeat, creating a chilling symphony of predator and prey. The streets ahead of her stretched into the darkness, and Anna realized her flight had only just begun. With every echoing shriek that followed, Anna felt an invisible hand squeezing her mind. each grip more suffocating than the last. The sounds weren't just noises. They felt like invasive tendrils worming their way into her very thoughts, making clarity a fleeting luxury. Each cry from the creature exacerbated her disorientation, blurring the edges of her vision and making her surroundings feel like an ever-shifting maze. Driven by sheer adrenaline, Anna's legs became her lifeline. They moved with a will of their own, guiding her through the labyrinthine streets of the city. Narrow alleyways became her temporary refuges, their tight corners and overhanging balconies providing brief shadows to hide within. But even as she zipped through them, the walls seemed to close in, resonating with the creature's cries and amplifying her dread. The once familiar faces of the city became a chaotic blur. Startled pedestrians jumped out of her path, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. Some shouted after her, their voices a distant murmur against the creature's relentless wails. Mothers pulled their children close, shopkeepers emerged from their storefronts, and street performers paused mid-act, all turning their gazes toward the frantic woman sprinting past them. As Anna darted across intersections, horns blared and tires screeched. More than once she narrowly avoided collisions with speeding vehicles, their drivers shouting expletives or honking in annoyance. But the near misses barely registered in her panic-stricken mind. All that mattered was putting distance between her and the pursuing terror. In the depth of her heart, she clung to a sliver of hope that the maze of the city, with its bustling life and myriad distractions, would somehow throw the creature off her trail. Maybe, just maybe, something in this urban jungle would divert its insatiable hunger. But as each street passed and the shrieks continued, Anna realized that hope was fading fast. The city, once a sprawling metropolis full of life and energy, now seemed endless and imposing to Anna. Every street, every corner she turned only presented more of the same. More distance to run, more ground to cover with no refuge in sight. Her once swift steps began to falter, weighed down by a fatigue that seeped into her very bones. With every block she crossed, a heavy weariness settled deeper into her muscles. The initial rush of adrenaline that had propelled her now clashed with the sheer physical exhaustion of her prolonged escape. Her breaths, once sharp and hurried, became ragged and shallow, each inhale feeling like a battle. The creature's shrieks, haunting and ceaseless, seemed to intensify with Anna's growing vulnerability. It was as if it fed off her desperation, each cry designed to drain a little more of her resolve. The pressure in her head, once a dull ache, now felt like a relentless tide, threatening to submerge her thoughts and consciousness. Anna's surroundings took on an ethereal, dreamlike quality. Buildings merged into one another, their sharp edges melting into the dim twilight. Streetlights shimmered and danced, their halos becoming larger and more distorted. Pedestrians, vehicles, and the sounds of the city faded into the background, replaced by a deafening silence occasionally shattered by the creature's cries. The rhythmic pounding of her heart, which had been her constant companion, now seemed eerily synchronized with the creature's movements. Every beat, every pulse was a stark reminder of the chase. Each thud in her chest mirrored the creature's predatory hunger, its malevolence amplified with her growing despair. In this haze of fear and fatigue, one thing became painfully clear to Anna. She was running out of time, and the creature was closing in. The maze of the city had led Anna down countless turns and twists. But as she sprinted around this particular corner, a different sensation gripped her. It was as though she had inadvertently stumbled into the very epicenter of the creature's power. The ground beneath her felt as if it trembled, resonating with an unseen force. Buildings loomed over her, their towering structures seeming to lean in, casting oppressive shadows that seemed to swallow the ambient light. An icy wind whipped around the corner, its chilling embrace further sapping her dwindling strength. And then it came. The shriek. Unlike the previous cries, this one bore a depth and resonance that was profoundly otherworldly. It wasn't just a sound, it was a tangible force, an onslaught of pure sonic agony. The pain was immediate, a white-hot lance that pierced through Anna's mind, causing her vision to fracture into a kaleidoscope of distorted images. Each step became a Herculean effort. Her legs, which had served her so faithfully throughout the chase, now threatened to buckle under the intensity of the creature's final assault. Her breaths came out in short, desperate gasps, the cold air stinging her lungs. Anna's surroundings began to lose their coherence. The vibrant, chaotic cityscape was replaced by a swirling void of darkness. Every sound, every sensation seemed to be consumed by this enveloping blackness, leaving only the pulsating pressure in her head and the haunting echo of the creature's shriek. Her momentum slowed, every ounce of her willpower focused on just keeping her upright. But it was a losing battle. As Anna's steps faltered, her world tilted, and she felt an inexorable pull towards the ground. It was as if gravity itself had intensified, eager to claim her. As she staggered, the once distant pressure inside her head now felt like a roaring tempest, threatening to burst forth. The boundary between reality and the encroaching darkness became indistinguishable. With a final, desperate breath, Anna braced herself for the inevitable climax of this nightmarish encounter. The city had witnessed countless spectacles throughout its storied history, but nothing could have prepared its denizens for the horrifying tableau that now unfolded on its ancient streets. Anna, caught in a battle between her own waning strength and the relentless assault of the creature, suddenly radiated an intense, blinding light. It emanated from her very being, casting an otherworldly glow that seemed to temporarily freeze time. The surroundings were bathed in a pale luminescence, casting long, dramatic shadows on every surface. Then, with a gut-wrenching cacophony, Anna's head erupted. It wasn't merely a physical explosion, it was an outburst of energy, emotion, and raw power. A shockwave radiated outward, sending ripples through the very fabric of the air. Windows shattered in nearby buildings, car alarms blared, and the few stray animals in the vicinity fled in panic. The once busy city streets were brought to an immediate and eerie standstill. Pedestrians who had been going about their nightly routines were rooted in place, eyes wide with a mix of horror and disbelief. Drivers pulled over, their faces pressed against their car windows, trying to comprehend the unfathomable scene before them. As the remnants of the explosion settled, a thick, oppressive silence enveloped the area. The only sound was the soft, mournful whistle of the wind, as if the city itself was lamenting the loss of one of its own. From the epicenter of this chaos, the alien emerged unscathed. Its three antennae glowed with an even more vibrant intensity, pulsating rhythmically. The creature hovered for a brief moment, surveying the aftermath of its actions with what seemed like quiet satisfaction. Then, with an air of finality, it ascended, slowly disappearing into the night sky. The people left behind were bound by a shared trauma, a community forever scarred by the inexplicable events of that fateful night.